Hi, thanks for coming to my channel. I've just come across an interesting link which is quite thought-provoking. Based on some of the people named in, I guess it's from the mid-2010s, and I got this via the British and Global Muslims for Secular Democracy um, group, which I've been a member of for about 10 years. I'm not a Muslim, but I support their ideals of promoting secular democracy and opposing Islamism. Anyway, this is from one Imran Ahmed on the group, and the caption shows some little girls in Syria, obviously after a bombing raid. Shows Syrian refugees on a dinghy in the Mediterranean. It shows Bashar Assad meeting General Soleimani, and it shows some women with candles, ostensibly as a sort of vigil for a bombing or another one of the many atrocities in this awful war. Anyway, beneath those photo captions, beneath the photos, is this scenario. So I'm going to just read this out and then share a few comments afterwards regarding Syria and regarding some of the responses to the death of Soleimani. This is from the 7th of January, but like I say, it may be dated to, it may be in the context of the mid 2010s. Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron, that's why I thought it's mid 2010s, obviously he's not in office anymore. Imagine this scenario. Prime Minister David Cameron ordered the Royal Air Force and the British Army to bomb and completely decimate constituencies held by Labour and to kill civilians there without mercy and with absolute impunity. Prime Minister Cameron also authorised the use of chemical weapons. He also enlisted the support of the German and French governments, who provided considerable military assistance. Hundreds of thousands of civilians were killed, millions fled their homes. Fortunately, this never happened. We cannot even imagine such a thing happening in the West. It would indeed be incomprehensible. But in Syria, it did happen. And this is a direct quotation from the captions. President Bashar Hafiz al-Assad has for years been ordering his armed forces to mercilessly attack areas held by the opposition, killing civilians, bombing them out of their homes. This is why we have a Syrian refugee crisis. Who helped Assad to do this? Russia and Iran. Who oversaw this operationality on behalf of Iran? General Qasem Soleimani. Soleimani fight ISIS? Yes, he did. In that respect, he was useful. We, by which this means the West, shared a common enemy. Nothing and no one is black and white. Was it okay to assassinate General Soleimani in Iraq? No comment. Should we be concerned that this may be a reckless act geopolitically? Somewhat. In the UK and the West in general, should we be holding candlelit vigils in honour of General Soleimani? Absolutely not. I'm okay with anti-war and pro-peace demonstrations, but holding vigils in honour of General Soleimani is absolutely unacceptable. Ask how many Syrian refugees what they think about that. Please share, and I have shared, because I absolutely agree with the message that's being put out there. I have to say I find it rather sickening to see Westerners like Jeremy Corbyn and the actress Rose McGowan actually crying over this blood-drenched man, Qasem Soleimani. In the region, I would suggest he comes second only to Bashar Assad for personal culpability of blood on his hands. Even Baghdadi, monster as he was, ISIS killed thousands. The Syrian regime killed tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. In the short but bloody period that ISIS was active from roughly 2014 to its decimation, let's say roughly last year, it killed thousands of people. It was an evil, sadistic death cult, no question about it. But one of the biggest, I think, distortions of the 2010s was the Russian led propaganda that Assad was just an embattled president trying to save his country from terrorists. The truth about the Middle East is a very, very, very complex region. I'd say the world's most complex region geopolitically. And I just find it sickening that people can be so blinded by their self-righteous opposition to Western foreign policy that they will actually pander to the outright lies of the Russian state and of Russian, Iranian, and Syrian regime propaganda. Um, I mean, this is exemplified by the fact that the late James Missouri, in my view, a very brave and decent man who dedicated his life to helping others, when he died under mysterious circumstances in Ankara, Russia was smearing him as a spy. And Russian state media had smeared the white helmets as helping terrorists with virtually no evidence to that, other than the fact that they were operating in rebel held areas, but they were helping civilians from the rubble perpetrated by Russian and Syrian regime bombing campaigns. Now, there will be people out there who jump on this video and say, "Oh, Nathan, you're a neocon. This guy is just a brainwashed Westerner. This guy is X, Y, and Z." They'll put me in a sort of position whereby I always agree with Western foreign policy, but that is not my record. I actively opposed the Iraq War, and I still believe that was a foreign policy disaster. It did trigger massive instability in the region, and it was the lack of significant preparation for the aftermath of that was catastrophic, not least the massive damage it done to Britain and America's reputation. But that does not mean that Iran is innocent. For the Iranian regime to talk about being anti-imperialist and even pacifist is frankly grotesque. This is a regime that has been interfering in neighbouring countries for years. Now, Iran regime apologists would say, oh, but look at all the American air bases in the region, all the American military bases. And there will be rights and wrongs around that, but consider the fact that many of Iran's neighbours consider it a destabilizing force in the region. And this schism in the Middle East between Sunni and Shia, unfortunately, it's sort of like a microcosm of the Cold War in the sense that during the Cold War, what you had was a situation of right wing governments fighting communist insurgencies backed by the West. But you also had left wing dictatorships fighting right wing insurgencies backed by the Soviet Union. Now, in the Middle East, looking at things on a smaller scale, you have the Shia Sunni thing. And the truth of the matter is, there are Sunni extremists and there are Shia extremists, and there are innocent Sunnis and innocent Shias killed by the extremists. And both Iran and Saudi Arabia, our ally, have blood on their hands. You know, I have no more love for the Saudi regime than I do for the Iran regime, and I don't think that we should be blind to their human rights record just because they're our allies. But when the likes of Jeremy Corbyn portray the Iran regime as innocent victims, I find it utterly grotesque. Soleimani was a violent man with a violent record, a man who was loved by many people in the region. Yes, he was loved by many people in the region. I'm not going to dispute that. I mean, at his funeral procession, 40 people died in the stampede. Um, so that sort of adulation is rarely seen. Within that part of the world. We saw it previously with Ali Khomeini in 1989 and with Gamal Nasser in, was it 75? I forget the year that Nasser died, but in Egypt, also those sort of things. But what I find is, yes, there will be some on the right in the West who will always blindly defend Western policy no matter what, and get into a kind of jingoistic thing like you're a traitor or you're far left if you don't agree with what the president's doing. But what has also been very noticeable over the past 10 years is the sheer number of people within the West who will blindly believe everything RT tells them. And they get into conspiracy theories, and their worldview is basically it's all a CIA plot to get oil. And Iran's the good guys, and the wicked American regime are the bad guys. That's their worldview. And I take the position that if that is your outlook on things, you're actually exonerating the rivers of blood that Iran has spilt in the region. By all means, criticize America. That's not my contention. I am not saying don't criticize America. I am saying if you're only criticizing America and putting up blinkers to the atrocities, the inhumane brutality committed by the Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, then you are being deliberately ignorant. And you can say, oh, it's all big propaganda, conjured up by the West. The truth is, there's very few players in the Middle East that come out completely clean, if any. I'm not going to lie, the West has blood on its hands in the Middle East. My country has, the United States has. But I am sick and tired of certain leftists constantly, constantly serving as cheerleaders for the likes of the Iran regime. It's absolutely sickening when you look at the track record of this regime. Even if you don't believe that they're a destabilizing force in the region, look at their human rights record. This is not something to be adulated and admired. Soleimani may have been a hero to Islamist Iranians and to the zealots of the Iranian Revolution, but this man was no saint. This is a man who had many civilian deaths on his hands, not least the brutal crackdown of protests last year. So, when it comes to the Middle East, I wish that certain people on the left, and I'm not talking about the left in general here, but well, actually, it also even gets into the far right because this is something that both the far right and the hard left have in common. They both are convinced that the globalists, by which they mean Washington and London, are responsible for all the world's problems, and they share admiration for the Putin regime, particularly the far right. So I am attacking the regressive left. I also attack the far right. I mean, you get someone like Alex Jones, take their views on Bashar Assad. Jones doesn't give a damn. I'm just using him as an example. Doesn't give a damn about Assad's human rights record. You push someone like Alex Jones, he will very much buy into the conspiracy theory that Putin is a great guy fighting Islamist terrorists, totally ignoring just how toxic Russian foreign policy has been over the last 20 years under Putin. It is under Putin that relations have deteriorated. So when I hear people, I recently heard someone say if Hillary Clinton became president, we'd be at war with Russia. So the insinuation is that it's the West to blame for tensions. It is Russia that has played a very big role in destabilizing East West relations because Putin wants to reclaim the old Soviet empire. That's very obvious because after the Cold War, Russia had a big loss of face. And, it's a proud country. That's understandable. I don't even question why Putin does what he does. Um, what I do question is the useful idiots in the West who back people like this. I have to be honest, I find it sickening. That is why I hope Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard doesn't get anywhere near final stages of this presidential race. In my opinion, her stance on Syria is an absolute disgrace. She keeps talking about her military record, and the implication there is obvious. Oh, this proves I'm a patriot. Well, she served her country bravely. She deserves credit for that, but that does not make her right about foreign policy. And what I've noticed is if you criticize someone like Tulsi Gabbard, who kind of her whole narrative is, "Oh, I've served," and let's not get into other pointless foreign wars. Fair enough. That sounds great. That sounds practical. That sounds morally righteous. But then when you hear that this is a woman who has met Bashar Assad, after years of brutalizing Syrian civilians, to me, that utterly disqualifies her from the White House. It's one thing saying we need to not be reckless, we need to avoid foreign wars. Fine, because there's a very strong argument to be made with that. But this is a woman who claimed neutrality, yet she met Assad and she sits on the fence with Assad. Did she meet Syrian opposition leaders? No, she didn't. So I really have a problem with her logic. I don't think she's going to get anywhere near the White House, but when someone like me criticizes Tulsi Gabbard, people say that I'm an ignorant neocon, that, oh, she's a pacifist. She's not a pacifist. Tulsi Gabbard, by serving as an apologist for Bashar Assad, is not a pacifist. So let's make that very clear. Because there's this assumption that if you oppose Western foreign policy, if you oppose Western military intervention, oh, well, then you're pro peace, you're anti war. But by default, if you're not simultaneously saying you also condemn Russian and Syrian militarism and Iranian militarism, then by default, you're not a pacifist. So that's what really I find hard to accept is the dishonesty of progressive leftists. When Rose McGowan came out and made a sickening apology to the Iranian regime, she tried to portray it like she was apologizing to the Iranian people. It was all about their culture and so on. But what she was really doing was serving as someone kowtowing to the Iranian regime, which is exactly what they want. Now, the latest situation seems to be that things have, at least they're on hold. They haven't quite de-escalated, but they haven't escalated either. Nothing more has happened today. Well, there were reports of rockets firing into Baghdad's green zone, but no reports of culpability. I think maybe this will calm down for now, but I, for one, will not be crying over the death of Soleimani. Doesn't mean I think it was necessarily a practical move, but those who are crying over him, when Corbyn refuses repeatedly to call Soleimani a terrorist, I mean, Corbyn is a man who, for years, chaired the Stop the War Coalition. The Stop the War Coalition is, in my opinion, a pretty odious organisation. It vilifies the West, but more importantly, it serves as apologists for Russia and Assad. I think that is absolutely sickening. Now, I challenged them on this once, and they said, "Oh, we condemn all bombing, including Russia." But that's just like a little footnote. They barely condemn Russia. So, as far as I'm concerned, when you try to present yourself as neutral, but you're only attacking one side, then you're not neutral. You're just not. So the Stop the War Coalition, I mean, surprise, surprise, their spokesperson appeared on Russia Today. Yeah. So I think they're a pretty odious organisation. They come from the same school of thought as the likes of George Galloway and other demagogues. And you only have to look at the average RT thread to see the sort of mentality that I'm talking about here. People who are not interested in critical thinking, they're not interested in any sort of acceptance of any Russian or Syrian or Iranian culpability for what's happening in the region. By Syrian, I mean Syrian regime. Um, in their worldview, oh, it's all the fault of the West. You just have to look at Russia today's reporting to see the sort of angle that they take. Everything's the fault of the West. RT is absolutely poison to journalism because it is not independent journalism. The journalists, so called, who work for RT are nothing but lapdogs of the Russian government, as far as I'm concerned. And if you think I'm being too rude or too blunt, consider this. Consider the amount of genuinely brave journalists who have died in Putin's Russia. People who have risked their lives to expose corruption, to expose how the Russian regime operates. And then you have these people who are basically parroting the Russian state's line. And no, it is not comparable to the BBC or CNN because the BBC and CNN do not respectively kowtow to the British and American governments. I mean, my goodness, CNN and Trump have been at loggerheads for years, and the BBC can hardly be seen. Okay, Corbynites will say it is, but the BBC gets attacked by both sides. Conservative MPs would say the BBC has a left wing bias. So I just don't think it's comparable to say, oh, well, what about Western media? I think Western media, for all its faults, and there are many faults, you cannot say it is as closely tied to Western governments as the likes of RT is with the Kremlin. I don't think there's a comparison. Okay, you might get pundit to support the position of the Western governments, but it just isn't comparable. And anyone who really spends some time thinking about this rather than just going along with whatever conspiracy theory they want to believe promoted by RT, would see that. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Um, It's a tragedy that this humanitarian crisis in Syria now continues into this era. I don't know how it's going to end. It does look like Assad has the upper hand, and it looks like ISIS has largely been defeated, which in itself is a good thing. But just because Soleimani and Assad were against ISIS doesn't make them the good guys. Not at all. I mean, let's not forget ISIS only really was galvanized from about 2014 onwards as a significant force. I mean, Iran's been destabilizing the region for years, long before the rise of ISIS. So presenting this as, oh, it all began with ISIS, I think that's one thing that both the far right and the far left do. And also the useful idiots for Putin. They seem to think, oh, well, Putin and Assad are fighting ISIS. Oh, so they're the good guys. It is not that simple. And anyone who thinks it is really hasn't spent time thinking about it. I'm not going to sit here and pretend I know everything about the Middle East. The Middle East is a very, very complex region. What I am saying is if you're going to vilify the West on the grounds of pacifism, at least be consistent. So, okay, attack Britain and America, attack them all you want. That's freedom of speech, that's what we have in democracies. But do not serve as cheerleaders for a dictator who gasses his own people. To me, that's absolutely repugnant, and I'll leave it there. Rest in peace, James and Missouri, and rest in peace, all those brave people, journalists, human rights activists, and others who stood up against tyranny.